Hey, David, welcome to the show.
Hey Kevin, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
We're doing excellent here in Vermont. A beautiful day.
I was gonna ask you where you're located. Yeah, so Vermont. I don't get too many guests from Vermont. What is the weather like this time of year in May?
Oh, 70 degrees, blue skies, and it is green here. Everywhere you look is just lush green. The mountains, trees everywhere, just green.
Wow. Yeah, a little different than the my home state where I grew up, New Mexico, which was pretty dry, given it's in the desert. And then, now I'm in central Texas, which is humid and somewhat green, but I would not imagine as green as Vermont.
That's interesting. I was just in Albuquerque, New Mexico this past week. We were at the Canacon show.
That's right. Yeah. My business partner from Espiritu was actually out there. Was it a good show? I heard good things.
It was an excellent show, and it's really excellent for us because we help folks in challenging climates, and that's one of the challenging climates where it's dry, and your flower gets over dried, really tough to control. So we excel in these hard to dry, cure, and store cannabis in climates that are either really wet, really dry, or fluctuate all over the place.
All right. You could not be more right about New Mexico flower. I mean, not all flower, right? But for the most part, I mean, it does dry out so fast. I mean, and if you're not storing it properly, before you know it, it's basically just like dust when you break it up. Um,
Exactly.
so really, really excited to talk to you about Cannatrol, which is you founded. You're the CTO of the company, and how you basically helped evolve the post harvest process. But before we dive into that evolution and how y'all have really driven that innovation, tell me about the pain points from the legacy post harvest process. Like why wasn't it working in your view?
Well, up until now, the technology wasn't available. And everyone knows if you take a fresh cut flower, it's not something that you'd be able to smoke. So you need to dry out and get rid of some of, well, what's called the free available water to get to a shelf stable product. If you leave the flower wet, it's going to go moldy. And we use science. We use the measurement of water activity, and at a zero point 0.6 water activity, you have a shelf stable product that cannot support mold, and you've taken out just enough water. Because if you take out any more water, it becomes over dried, the quality degrades, and if you're selling it, you're losing weight. So that's the magic number, zero point 0.6. And so that's what we're looking to do is get you to that number and hold it there. Versus legacy in the past, you would put the flower in a dry place, whether it was outside, in a barn, in a room with an air conditioner, a room with a dehumidifier, or possibly both. But in all of those situations, the water is constantly leaving the flower. The flower is always drying. So you at some point need to arrest the drying process. And what people would then do is put them in jars, containers, bags, whatever. But it was somewhat of a guess when to arrest the drying, when to remove it from the area where it's drying and put it in a sealed container. And at that point, if it was removed too soon from the drying area and the flower had still free available water and you sealed it in a container, it's going moldy. So then we start burping the containers. Well, if you burp a container in January in New England, here in Vermont, where the air is bone dry in the winter, you're going to let out whatever moisture is in that container. You're going to reseal it, and then whatever moisture was left in the flower is going to rehydrate that container. So every time you burp it, you're continually drying the flower and eventually will over dry the flower. Where on the other hand, if you're in Florida in August and you open up that jar, probably the air outside the jar is a lot wetter inside the jar. So, two very unscientific things happen guessing when to pull the flower and put it in a sealed container, and then when to open the jar to burp it and either let water out or let water in. There's a lot of guessing there. So what we do is we get you to the right water activity. And basically, you put the flower in a space at that vapor pressure to get you there. And the flower comes to equilibrium. It loses its free available water and it's now curing. You don't have to move it. You don't have to do anything and just leave it there. And the longer you leave it there, the longer it cures, and it's long-term storage.
Long term meaning, I mean, how long?
Oh, we've
Years?
had, oh yeah, we've had flower in a unit for 2 years. It was let's see, it was Golden Goat, if I recall, and it smoked amazing. The flower was still sticky and supple. It did oxidize a bit. It did turn a little golden brown, but it was just as amazing it was 2 years prior.
Wow. So, David, let's back up. What is your relationship with the cannabis plant and how did this idea come about? I mean, was this a light bulb moment where, I mean, you mentioned briefly when we first started that, this technology wasn't there and I'm guessing because you didn't invent it. So, what brought you to this moment?
Oh, they say a strange trip it's been. Um, it started with cheese. Um, I was
Jeez.
working with cheesemakers here in Vermont, artisan cheesemakers, over a decade ago, and they were all complaining about aging their cheese and their cheese aging rooms and how it was over drying the cheese and the cheese was cracking and it was inconsistent. And again, they're struggling with the dry winters, the wet summers. And if you think back, cheese has been around for hundreds, probably thousands of years. But you would make cheddar in Cheddar, England. You would make a Romano in Emilia Romano, Italy. You wouldn't think about making cheddar cheese in Italy or vice versa. Why? It had to do with the climate. It had to do with the ground conditions, the caves, the geology. It was different in different areas. And today, people want to make any kind of cheese anywhere in the world, any time of the year. And back 100 some odd years ago, they only made cheese certain times of the year when their herd was lactating and they had milk.
Mhm.
And then once their herd dried up, they weren't making any more cheese. Well, now it's all the time. So the aging was a struggle. So I came up with an idea to control the conditions in the cheese aging room for optimum for wherever you are. And it worked well. We have cheese aging rooms throughout North America, as far west as Hawaii, down into Texas, Florida, and up all through Canada, several hundred of them.
Wow.
That then led to, hey, would this work for meat, for charcuterie? And sure enough, we've got people doing charcuterie with this. And it's the same thing. You're taking wet meat, you're putting it in a casing, and you're hanging it to dry. And the rate of which it dries is critical. If you pull the water too fast, you do what's called case hardening, and the outside of that salami will no longer allow water to pass through, and you wind up with rancid meat in the middle. Same thing can happen to a cannabis flower if you dry it too quickly. You seal up the outside without letting the interior water get out. So here we're now doing cheese and meat, and then we looked at, and I've been a consumer of cannabis flower since high school or sooner. And so I said, hey, you know, you need to properly dry and cure the flour. And the physics are no different than cheese, charcuterie, dry aged steaks. It's
Did,
about getting the water out of the product at a controlled rate and getting it to a target water activity.
Did
And
did you realize or did you see the drying process? Like I know that you mentioned you had experience with cannabis even dating back to high school, but did you understand the drying curing process fully or did you kind of see it and then think, okay, we need to do this differently. We need to apply what we've done with meats and cheese.
well, I looked at what was being done, and it was more, what are you trying to accomplish? Not, why you're doing what you're doing.
It's
Is
the
what's
best question to ask to start with, right? What are you trying to accomplish? That's a great
exactly.
question. Yeah.
And then it was like, wow, it's the same physics. You're trying to do the same thing people are doing with cheese. They're trying to do with meat. You're trying to remove water, excess water, get it to a target water activity and shelf stability. You don't want it going moldy. You don't want it going rancid. So we took a small unit and because no one was going to let us use a large facility to play with several hundred thousand, if not millions, dollars to play with. So we built a small little unit and put all the technology into a little insulated box and tried it. We gave it to a grower who was well known here in Vermont. And after a couple of weeks, he came back and said, "That is some of the finest flower I have ever produced."
Wow.
And he did it again. And he said, "And it's consistent." So we built a couple of more prototypes. And everyone who tried it said, "This thing is amazing." So we quickly learned that the same physics applies to a cannabis flower. And we then scaled it up and went into large commercial facilities. So we have large commercial facilities throughout the US. We're shipping to the UK, we're shipping to Thailand, big commercial facilities where they're bringing in hundreds into thousands of pounds of flower to be dried, cured, and stored.
And is that business model? I mean, do you play in both the hemp space, which, as most everyone knows, it's nationally legal to grow hemp, right? I mean, some states, um, I don't know if there's any bans in some states, but anyway, and then for cannabis, it's state by state regulation, right? So, are these big drying facilities that you mentioned, are they in the cannabis space? Are they hemp? Is there both?
They're typically in the cannabis space, and they typically tend to be indoor because when you start doing outdoor hemp, it's a huge amount of biomass to get a lot of water out quickly, and it's a one-time shot. And we're looking at, the cost of capital equipment. So what we primarily focus is high quality smokable cannabis flower. And what we're providing now is sort of like what happened in the beer industry. After Prohibition, there was a lot of national cheap beer, Budweiser, Pabst Blue Ribbon, Schlitz. But now today, there's craft beer,
Mm-hmm.
high quality, and we're providing the technology for people to make craft smokable flower. Once you smoke flower that's been really properly dried and cured, there's no going back to legacy methods.
Well, that's what I'm kind of thinking, right? Because I don't think, I mean, I haven't experienced that. And so I can understand that the operators currently are doing the best that they can with the technology and the methods that we know. But as this is, catching people's attention and really getting more adopted, I can see that this could really change the game, particularly from the consumer perspective.
Oh, absolutely. So interesting story. We wind up in Albuquerque going to CannaCon, and one of the guys in our crew was standing at a Starbucks counter talking to the barista, and he saw that he had a Cannatrol logos and started talking about cannabis. And the barista said to him, "Well, if you want some of the finest flower in Albuquerque, you need to go to this chain of dispensaries." Well,
I'm curious, what was it called?
it was Seven Clover, and
Okay.
that's who has our technology. And here,
No way. Wow.
unsolicited, the barista's like, "This is the best flower you can find in Albuquerque." And we're finding in Massachusetts, large grow facilities that have adapted our technology. The competition needs to do it if they want to keep up. What we've done is we're changing the race to the bottom. Up until now in the industry is who can produce the most, the fastest. And there wasn't a whole lot of thought going into the quality. It was just quantity and price. And we're
Right.
breaking that now where we're giving people quality. And the consumer, once they smoke really good, properly dried, cured flower, they they keep coming back to whoever is supplying that. They get brand loyalty very quickly.
Right, right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would imagine that, I mean, if you're storing it in your retail dispensary, the flower, even the shelf life of that cannabis is gonna have more longevity than just traditional legacy kind of post uh curing, or excuse me, like storing, correct?
That's correct. And what some of our producers are now doing are putting our small unit, our home unit, in dispensaries. So now when the consumer comes in, it's stored properly right to the point of sale. So when the consumer walks out of the store, it has been dried and cured properly where it was grown, and then transported and properly stored at point of sale.
Mm-hmm.
You think about beer, ice cream, you wouldn't leave that unrefrigerated during the whole transport chain. You want to maintain it at optimum conditions through the entire process until the consumer walks out the door with it.
Right, right. No, absolutely. You also brought up a point earlier that I just want to touch back on, and it was really interesting to me, and that is the yield, right? So, like in the legacy post harvest process, you mentioned if you over dry it, it weighs less. Therefore, you're getting less margin, right? Because you're selling flour that isn't weighing as much as it should.
Precisely. So what we do is we go to facilities and we travel with a water activity meter. A lot of facilities don't get the water activity reading on their lab reports. So we'll bring a water activity meter and we'll test samples. And the ideal water activity for shelf stability and maximum yield is zero point 0.6. And we'll go in and test flour. We were just at a facility. I'm not going to name any names, but they were coming in the high zero point 0.4, 0 0.48, 0 0.49. And we have a chart. And right off the bat, we said, you're losing probably 7% of your yield by over drying. And that's
Wow.
coming right off your top line because all your inputs are the same. All your energy for lighting, nutrients, genetics, that's all the same. You just lost 7% due to loss of weight by over drying the product. And the over dried product doesn't smoke anywhere near as well as a properly dried product to the right water activity.
Mm-hmm.
A couple other things we see also is not only are people losing yield by over drying, we're reducing labor. Up until now, with legacy, you would hang the flower and you'd have it in the room, and then it was like, all right, Friday, you're looking at it and saying, if we wait till Monday, this is going to be way too dry. We're going to have to come in on the weekend and pull it. Labor shifting. With our system, who cares? Leave it till Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's curing. It's only getting better. It's not going to over dry. So we had one facility, they did a retrofit to one of their dry rooms, and they said right off the bat, they saved 1 man-year of labor because now they weren't moving flour to jars, burping, all that labor disappeared.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't even think about that, right? I mean, you would have to do labor shifts, and I mean, you have to accommodate to the environment that the flower is hung, as opposed to you having control through this technology. And I want to dive into the technology itself. So, tell me about the science. How does this work,
Okay,
Cannatrol?
so we've got 2 patents that have been issued. We've got 2 more in the works. And what it's about is controlling the vapor pressure and the temperature in a space independently. Up until now, when you use, let's call it repurposed comfort cooling equipment for drying and curing, you're using air conditioners or dehumidifiers. And when an air conditioner is running, it's doing 2 things simultaneously. It's cooling the air and drying the air at the same time. A dehumidifier tends to dry the air and slightly warms the air simultaneously. Those are the 2 variables that make up humidity, is the temperature of the air and the amount of water in the air. With our technology, we're able to independently control the temperature and the amount of water in the air. We can independently move those 2 variables, which you can't do with standard air conditioning or dehumidifiers.
And that's really, I mean, something that's pretty revolutionary, right? Because before that, it's pretty difficult to separate the two.
That's correct. And what would people would talk about is controlling humidity. And the reality is you can't control humidity because it's made up of 2 variables, the temperature of the air and the amount of moisture in the air. So once you have control of the 2 variables, then you really have control of relative humidity. But
You have
without that,
Cannatrol.
that's great. Well, I like to say to people, they say, I said, could you change your payment on a loan? And you can adjust the payment on a loan. That's not adjustable. You have to adjust the interest rate or you have to adjust the term, or you have to adjust the principal. But there's no such thing as adjusting the payment because it's made up of those other variables. Relative humidity is the same thing. It's made up of two variables, the temperature of the air and the amount of moisture in the air.
Got you. Yeah. That's a good example to share. Yeah, that makes sense when you break it down that way, paying back a loan. Let me ask you this. This is probably what most people are thinking at this point, right? Is the price point. I mean, what does this cost? I mean, are there different kind of packages? I would imagine you did talk about kind of the smaller box unit, but is there like a custom build that y'all do for more commercial curing and drying?
Exactly. So we have basically two ways we go. We have a consumer unit for home use. It takes 2.2 pounds or a kilo of wet flour, and it'll yield 5 to 7 ounces. You'll have smokable flour in 8 days, but you can just leave the flour in there as long as you want. So people who are doing, perpetual harvest at home in a tent or what, they'll take down a plant or two, load the box, and then leave it in there. It dries, it cures. After 8 days, it's smokable, but they just keep it in there. But let's say in another 6 to 8 weeks, they have another plant to come down. What they would do is remove that dry flour, put it in a sealed container, put the next plant in, dry it. Takes about 4 days to dry, about 4 days to cure. And at 8 days, now you can put back in that first batch of flour. And what people are doing is putting them in little brown paper bags, old fashioned sandwich bags, and writing the date of harvest in the cultivar. And the box will hold 4 to 5 pounds of dry flour. So they wind up building an entire library. And it's like, okay, let's open the door. Let's see what we feel like smoking now. And it could be 6 months, it could be a year old. It's going to be just as good as it went in. So that's our consumer unit. We sell them direct online. They're $1,600. Then we go into the commercial space. And the commercial space we split two ways. We have what we call our kits, DC kits, dry cure. We make a DC4, which takes 160 pounds of wet flour. Next size up is a DC8, which takes 360 pounds or so. And then the next size up is about 720 pounds of wet flour. And these are kits. We ship them on 4x10 pallets, 2 or 3 pallets, depending on the size of the job. And usually people are able to stand one up in about a day. All they have to do is bring water and electric to it. These come with a steam humidifier. And why do we use a steam and humidifier included with the system? Well, if you're in a really dry climate and you open the door, you might dry out the room more than you want. So we inject steam, which is sterile, to rehydrate the space. And that way your flour doesn't lose any more moisture. We keep it perfect. And that's for in dry climates or in the winter when you open the door. So that needs a water line coming to it. So after the kits, and the DC4 kit is about $46,000 for the kit. Takes, again, the 160 pounds of wet flour. And depending on how many times you turn the room in a year, your payback could be a year or less. Once you get into the 8 and 16, all of those paybacks are under 1 year. Then we go to custom rooms. Custom rooms are where someone already has an existing dry room and they want to modify it. So it's using our technology, and their dry room will then turn into a dry cure storeroom. And it's a custom system. So what we need to know is how many wet pounds maximum they're going to bring in the room, because we're talking physics. We want to know how many pounds of water we need to remove from the flour. Lots of people call us and say, oh, my room is 10 by 12, 15 by 15. Doesn't matter what the size of the room is. It's what's the maximum amount of wet flour that's going to go into the room. So that's our custom, which are for retrofits, and then large build outs. We could be called into a facility, a 75, 100,000 square foot grow operation that's being built, and they'll build the rooms. And then we just supply the technology that goes into the rooms. And it's just part of the build out of a large new facility.
That makes sense. Yeah. Well, let's talk about your market footprint. I mean, you touched on earlier that you really thrive in markets where the climate isn't ideal, right? Like the drier climates, New Mexico you touched on, which is a desert. So where are y'all operating? I mean, where are you really servicing some of these maybe vertically integrated companies or multi-state operators? And where are you really seeing some success in any kind of state, particularly?
Oh, we're in quite a number of states, both rec and just medical. Our small home units, we've shipped to all 50 states and 12 countries, and we've shipped thousands of them.
Wow. Yeah, the consumer unit I'm like really interested in because um I have a trouble storing effectively my flour, right? I mean it gets over dried like you said. I'm trying to do the airtight containers, but I know over time that that's not good because I'm burping and I'm releasing like you said the moisture. So that's really something to consider. It's almost to me it's like a wine fridge, right? I mean it's the same application only you're using it for cannabis.
No, it's completely different. Okay,
Well, I
first,
understand that the science of refrigeration versus what you're doing there is different, but I'm saying the concept of preserving, that product. Right.
yeah, what it is so we use a sealed vapor tight box. That's the only thing that's similar to a refrigerator. We don't even have a refrigeration system, a compressor, evaporator coil. We don't have any of that. We just are using a vapor tight box. And a refrigerator is starting with a vapor tight box. So that's about
That's
as
basically what I meant. Yeah.
that's it. After that, they are totally different and they totally depart. We're not about cooling, we're about maintaining the right vapor pressure, the dew point in that space for drying, curing, and storing.
Right.
A lot of people go, "Oh, I can just buy a refrigerator." No, it's not even close. It's an insulated box, is the only thing that's similar.
Do cheese enthusiasts have like a consumer box like this to store their cheese?
No, no, we never got into consumer for cheese and meat. Those are all really large commercial artisan cheesemakers that use this technology.
Okay, yeah, there's not any like really cheese fanatics out there or meat fanatics that are like, "Hey, I gotta preserve this stuff."
Well, I mean, think about it. You're going to go to a cheese store, you're going to buy it, take it home and consume it. You're not going it'll stay fine in your
That's what
refrigerator.
I do with cannabis.
Yeah.
Well, David, what else haven't we touched on, man? I mean, you want to talk about maybe some trends that you're seeing that are related to this area that you're playing in within the industry, or
Yeah,
anything else?
the trend we're seeing is the consumer is desperate to have high quality craft products. And
Yeah.
that's what's going on. We had one a grower, and he was struggling like everyone else selling his pre rolls, and he retrofit his room, and now he can't produce his pre rolls fast enough. People now are asking specifically for that brand of pre rolls because he's using our technology for drying and curing.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense. Do you have any competitors, or are you guys the only ones right now?
No, there's everyone who is playing in the space is either using legacy methods or other methods that are not very gentle on the flower. We're just old fashioned. We're drying it, curing it, but we're not doing anything radical to the flower that rapidly removes the water from the flower or changes, physical attributes of the flower, which, can happen during crystallization and things like that.
Right. Well, it sounds like a really great position to be in. Cannatrol definitely innovating and providing a better consumer experience with high quality flour that's properly cured and dried. Uh, Future predictions, David, as we wrap up. I mean, is there anything that you want to kind of um, predict that will kind of unfold in the years to come or even months to come in the cannabis space?
Well, I think there's going to be that shift from who can produce the most flour for the least price to that craft, what we have seen in the beer industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. And I'm excited for that because I'm all about craft cannabis. And the more that we can really start to, see some uniqueness among states and, with that climate, but really ensuring that the flower is preserved correctly in any type of climate is important. And Cannatrol is obviously paving the way for that. So really appreciate your time, David, and your insights. And where can people find y'all's website and social media if they want to learn more about Cannatrol?
It's Cannatrols with an S.com is our website, and it's also our Instagram.
Got it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great talking.
Yes, of course. And thank you all for listening. Bye.